Hey everyone, this is Kit. I'm joined here today with some wonderful, incredible, outstanding Kira. We are reacting to
Dun, dun, dun.
The American Revolution Part 2 by OverSimplified. And if you really want to help us out, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to all the videos here on Chicago Reacts. We do appreciate all your support. And hit that ring bell notification so that way you get notified when we upload some really awesome content. With that being said, let's get started with this video and react to The American Revolution Oversimplified Part 2.
This video was made possible by Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Math and science done right.
Good.
Keep watching until the end of the video to learn how you can get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
I've never even heard of Brilliant.
Washington's butt
OMG.
was sufficiently kicked.
Oh, I
Winter
thought he
was
was
here. His troops' morale was low,
rear-ended.
some just up and left.
A different way.
Washington needed to do something, anything to restore faith in the revolution. The British had spread throughout New Jersey and settled in for a winter of drinking cider and partying hard.
Okay,
Nobody
good.
expected
Good
an
job.
attack in the winter, so Washington started making plans for an attack in the winter. The British had hired a large force of Hessian mercenaries
Why
from the
wouldn't you
German states of
expect
Hesse
that? Come
Castle
on.
and Hesse Hanau to fight the rebels. It was these mercenaries that were stationed across the Delaware River from Washington and his army. And there were more Hessian reinforcements incoming, but they made an unscheduled stop because their commander got thirsty. No, not that kind of thirsty. That kind of
Ah, the ladies.
blizzard outside when Washington heard the Hessian defenses were down and he decided to attack. He made a perilous crossing of the icy Delaware River with 2,400 men and marched 9 miles to Trenton, where he caught the Hessian forces completely off guard. After a short but fierce battle, the Hessians surrendered in droves. It was a much-needed victory that sent a clear message, not only to the British, but to Americans across the colonies. The war was far from lost. General Cornwallis led the British forces south to counterattack the Americans, but in a series of battles, Washington's defensive positioning and flanking maneuvers defeated the British 3 times in 10 days. And the British decided
Wow.
to abandon southern New Jersey for
That's
the
a
rest
turn of
the
events
winter.
right there,
Washington
my
finally
friend.
set up a winter camp in Morristown, but for the Americans, there was much less partying than the British. Elsewhere, the British had taken
Probably a
Newport,
good
Rhode
thing.
Island,
Yeah.
because it was a good naval base. In the south, they failed to take Charleston, South Carolina, which left British loyalists unsupported and vulnerable to more harassment and even mass expulsion. Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France on a mission to convince them to join the war, and while the French generally loved any opportunity to hoodwink the Brits, they didn't want to join unless it was a sure win. So for now, Franklin spent his days chilling out and chasing tail. The British Parliament
Hey, Ben,
get back
was
to work.
never
Of
yet, and the
course.
pressure was on to end it. So the British came up with a plan. General Burgoyne in Montreal and General William Howe in New York would advance through the Hudson Valley and meet in the middle, splitting the colonies in two, and thus screwing over the American communication lines. Burgoyne began his movement south, and after taking Fort Ticonderoga quite easily, he then came across heavy American resistance. So he sent Howe a dingle-dongle asking if he'd be showing up anytime soon. Meanwhile, Howe had completely
Wait a
abandoned the plan
minute,
and
they
gone for
didn't
more
have
personal glory
iPhones.
by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia. He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic. And Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing Congress
man,
to
this is
escape
so
to York.
exhausting.
But Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates teamed up with our old friend Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Arnold wanted to take the fight to the British, but Gates wanted to wait for the British to come to them. After a heated debate, Gates, the senior officer, told Arnold to go to his room, but Arnold defied his orders, and at the Battle of Bemis Heights, he charged at the British and obliterated them. Great job, Horatio. By the way, what happened to that other guy who was in Saratoga?
Who?
Benedict Arnold. Never heard
Single
of him.
tier.
Ouch. Hey, George, didn't I do a great job? Taking Philadelphia and all? Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans.
Okay.
All right, Benny, we're in.
Finally.
Hey, isn't this kind of funny? You know, because you're a republic trying to overthrow an absolute monarchy, and I'm an absolute monarchy helping you? Like, could you imagine if your revolution inspired my people to revolt against me?
Yeah,
and then they
right.
imprison me with my family?
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
Could you imagine? I mean, could you? Could you imagine?
That's
what could go
unfortunate.
wrong?
I mean,
For now,
I
in
don't think
America,
anything like
winter
that would
was here
happen,
once
though, right?
again,
Nah,
which
probably
meant yet
not.
more disease, more starvation, and even a little mutiny. After losing Philadelphia, Washington's job was again on the line. But suddenly, a Prussian guy with a very fancy name, hired by Benjamin Franklin, showed up
Wow,
out
that's
of
a
nowhere
long
and
name.
said, "Hey, I'm here to give your men a European military training." And train them he did. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and strict punishments were handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army came out of the winter in 1778 a
Take a
new
dump
and
wherever you
improved
want,
force,
man.
ready to
Challenge
take
society.
Philadelphia
Not
back from the
anymore.
British. In
Not
the end,
anymore,
though,
no.
they didn't have
Oh,
to.
okay,
With the
sure.
French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to
Depends.
evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke
Oy.
as they did from battle. In the end, after some incompetence/borderline treason from Washington's second in command, it was a draw. And in this war, a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans. Next up, let's talk about this guy. This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is handsome, Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war first broke out,
JPJ.
everyone was like, how did the colonies expect to stand up to the might of the British Navy with their meager fleet of converted merchantmen? Yep, try telling that to John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the British Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. These are basically pirate tactics. But hey, if it works, it works. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch port without an official ensign because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official U.S. flag. What they came up with looks
That's a
pretty
cool
cool.
looking
The whole
flag.
campaign probably
Looks
played
like-
heavily
yeah,
on
it
British
looks really
morale
cool.
and brought into question their ability to win the war. And fun fact, he was so cool that one of the towns he raided in 1778 gave him an official honorary pardon in 1999. Keep ripping in heaven, John Paul Jones.
Oh, that's
You're an
that's
England. The
wild.
Continental Navy
John
was
Paul
lacking in
Jones,
resources,
you
though. The
rascal,
French entry
you.
into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. Oh good, you're finally here. Check this out. Hey ladies, I'd like to fly you like a kite, because you're electrifying. Isn't this great? Is this what you've been
Is
doing?
this what you've
Yeah.
been doing?
Why?
I would probably
You were
say that
sent here
too.
on a
Dude, what have
diplomatic
you been
mission to
doing?
secure military support
I've
from
been
France, not
busy.
to philander with the locals. Wait, no, ladies, come back. Worst wingman.
Yeah, no doubt.
But the Americans would get some more help. The Dutch provided aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significantly, though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid, officially joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides actually enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war,
Yeah.
sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other. In the summer of 1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. And another group that shouldn't go unmentioned were African Americans, both free and enslaved. They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery,
Psych.
particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the southern colonies,
wild,
this was
isn't it?
removed from the final draft. For the same reason,
Yeah.
the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported, but they were forced to reverse the policy after the British promised freedom to any slaves who joined them. In general, you stood a better chance of gaining freedom if you fought for the British. However, even those that left with the British after the war suffered mistreatment and discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is now in charge of Philadelphia, having a good time, partying down with, and even marrying a member of the Philadelphia elite. The same elite that had
Hey.
partied down with the British when they controlled the city. And suddenly, the people of Philadelphia, including the state governor, started accusing Arnold of having pro-British sentiments. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point. Then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is our good friend no more. Luckily, the treasonous plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond, Virginia in 1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war.
Wow.
We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. The British debt was soaring, and despite taking parts of Massachusetts in late 1779, the North was in a stalemate, so the British decided to make a major shift in strategy
Oh,
to the
that's-
south,
that's
an
great.
economically rich area with a higher level of support for the British, or so the British thought. A year earlier, they had captured the underdefended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat.
Wowie.
The British quickly moved to take control, and they sent stereotypical Hollywood villain with a British accent, Bannister the Butcher Tarleton, into the backcountry where he hunted down rebels
Yes.
and destroyed them with ruthless brutality. The British presence also inspired local loyalist militias in the backcountry to rise up against their persecutors. The British really seemed to be onto something with their new strategy, and the ball was very much in Washington's court. I'm gonna send my most loyal general, Nathaniel Greene, to the south to stop the British. Gonna have to overrule you there, George. We're sending Hero of Saratoga and your biggest rival, Horatio Gates. Watch this, George. I'm gonna save the day again. Everybody will love me, and
Everybody
I'm
will
gonna
love
get
me.
your job. Here I go. And he got into one battle with Cornwallis, got annihilated, and ran away. Alrighty, let's go with your guy. Nathaniel Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics, so he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, said, "Hey big boy, look at me," and then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up with him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. Then the two led Cornwallis on a wild chase through North Carolina, his bigger and better equipped army much heavier and slower than Greene's quick and mobile troops. Greene led Cornwallis
mobile.
further
And
and
they're
further
flipping.
from his supply line,
There we
then
go.
crossed the Dan
Doing
River into
cartwheels.
Virginia, picked up some reinforcements, and turned back to face the now exhausted British. At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the
Yeah.
fighting, so it felt much more like a
550 to
British defeat.
250,
At this
jeez.
point, both
mean,
sides
they had
desperately needed something to happen soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of
A
money, while
lot
the
more
Americans were again facing mutinies as the men
casualties.
went without pay or even basic
more
living
people,
needs.
though, right?
Fortunately, the French were now showing up in greater numbers and were
Okay,
ready
French
to
are
fight.
here.
After his encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base. So he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington and on to Yorktown, a position the British believed would be easy to supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis's new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb idea. And to be fair, it was. Instead, Washington sent out fake dispatches to make it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis's army in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid, but Clinton was unusually chilled out about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. Over 7,000 British troops were captured, a crushing defeat, and with
70,000?
that, Parliament
Wow.
had reached the end of its rope. The war just wasn't worth it, and it needed to end now. The British still held New York,
Everyone's
Charleston,
fired.
and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. The resulting treaty in 1783 saw Great Britain remove its troops from American soil, recognize U.S. independence, and cede territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debt still owed to Britain and gave fair treatment to any colonists who had remained loyal to the crown. The Spanish got Florida, while the French got an economic crisis that led to its own revolution a decade later. Washington
didn't
was
see
tied
that
to
coming.
Sure
Mount
did.
Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying, "I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." He hoped to live out the rest of his days in peace, but unfortunately for him, a number of people wanted him to be the first leader of the new country, and by a number of
"No,
people,
I'm
I
so
mean literally
tired.
everyone.
I'm
The
so
first
tired.
election campaign in American history was basically a grassroots effort to convince Washington to accept the office. He was sworn in on April 30th, 1789. and
How
he
funny
himself
is that,
established Many
right?
of the standards and limitations of what the American leader should be. First of all, there was debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our glorious leader? In the end, they went for a word that at the time was pretty modest. President, like the president of your local bowling club or office bake sale committee. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how much of a stable genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress
might he
and gave
be
an
leading
annual
to?
State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He stated that the U.S. should remain neutral in foreign conflicts, and in the end, he voluntarily gave up his
That's funny.
power after just 2 terms. He could have made the presidency anything he wanted, but his careful and cautious actions helped set the precedent of an office that is powerful in its limitations, decisive through its diplomacy, and respected in its humility. And so the United States was born, and everything was perfect. It had no problems, not a single one. Certainly nothing that would
Not-
cause such an
nothing.
extreme divide that it would lead to a civil war.
Oops.
Anyway, moving on. Quick quiz.
well, you
Name
know,
the most American thing you can
details.
think of. Baseball? Bald Eagles? Calling the winner of an America-only sports tournament world champion?
That's right.
Or maybe math and science? Wait, math and science?
Math and science.
That's right. If you didn't know, science is as American as combining chicken with waffles.
All
And don't just
right.
take my
I
word
like
for
this.
it. Ask Thomas Jefferson. Of course, to do that, you would need a time machine. And that would take some math and a lot of science.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to deeply understand math and science, say you want to calculate the age of the
Brilliant.
universe.
You know,
Brilliant.
Special
Just
relativity.
kind of expand your mind. So let's actually get a little serious with this one. You know, the whole thing was the Revolutionary War. I mean, it was clearly a touch and go at some moments between the colonists and the British Royal Army. And just to be very clear, King George III, the monarch of the British Empire, did have some mental issues.
Yes,
And
he was a character from what I understand.
Yeah, actually, I don't know what movie it is, but probably someone out there will type in the comment section below. But they actually did like a documentary, film movie on King George III.
Oh, really?
And there's a scene, I don't know how historically accurate it is because I'm not too familiar with the monarch, but there's a scene in the movie where he snaps and attacks his own son, whose son is actually, pretty stable. Stable up there. But because again, King George was having a lot of mental issues. He would rage out at people.
Yeah.
And apparently he attacked his own son just out of the blue. I forget what part of the movie is in, but there's a clip of it, I think somewhere available. But he snaps and
Do you remember the name of this movie?
No, but I do know that it was talking about King George and how crazy he was. And he clearly had a lot of issues, and I'm kind of surprised at how much he was allowed to get away with by the British Royal Parliament.
Well, what I was just about to say is like, being that he had so many mental issues, I'm surprised that, while I was watching all of his battles going on and the British advancing and then coming back and all of these, it's surprising that they did so well under the rule of somebody who we may have had mental issues.
We've gone through that too.
Yeah, but
numerous times.
and I would assert that our success in certain areas really diminished when we are under the leadership of
somebody very questionable,
not so stable, not so genius,
not stable, not being a genius. But another thing too is just I guess the idea, and another thing, again, the video doesn't go too much into detail of it, but the situation that a lot of the slaves had to deal with. Well. Because like how ironic, like we're fighting, like the United States, the colonies are fighting for independence, but yet the slaves had a better chance of freedom under the British monarchy.
The whole thing with the slaves is an irony, and the United States. To declare independence and say everybody's created equal. Oh, but what we actually meant were white males.
And you gotta own land.
Yeah, and you have to own land.
Yeah.
It's all very ironic. And, it must have felt, I don't know, like I kind of feel like it would have been weird to be the author of those kinds of declarations while owning slaves. Like, do you think that there was,
I don't think he did. I don't think any of them did at all because, again, these were a lot of guys who made a lot of money and profit off of slavery, rum, sugar, as well as numerous other trades. And, I think the whole thing.
But
for
even
them,
there's deep human side of them. No,
I don't think so. And if they did actually have a human side to it, they must have repressed that feeling just to appease their other fellow colleagues who probably were not so liberal in their points of view. So again, a lot of our founding fathers, I guess, in their time were considered geniuses. But remember, they are human, and they made some very questionable, horrific decisions.
Some very horrible decisions.
And it led to remember, it's just not only the slaves that had to continue on under the horrible treatment. Under their owners, but also let's talk about the fact that even women couldn't vote, and also what happened to a lot of the Native American tribes that lived on that land. They were given, Ben Franklin himself gave the Native tribes 3 choices: assimilate, get off the land, or be exterminated. And of course, the colonial policy and eventually the American policy would be extermination.
Yeah.
And so again, it's kind of interesting. I wish things might have been different. Perhaps maybe if our founding fathers were like, you know what, wait. We're really just doing this whole liberty thing.
I think
let's really go for it.
Let's really do it.
Yeah, let's really do it. But again,
they were pretty. You think they were pretty clear with that all men are created equal.
But they were only talking about themselves.
But in the conversation for women, they were being clear about that. Mm-hmm. It was just where I see the irony being is that black men were not somehow created equal,
including Native American men.
And so had they...
Yeah. You had to own land.
Yeah, you had to own land. So even if you were a white man and you didn't own land, you couldn't vote.
Okay.
You couldn't vote at all. So it's interesting. Perhaps maybe in another universe, perhaps maybe King George III went 7th. Hey, though, let's be friends. He was like, you know what? # let's all be friends.
Let's all be friends.
Yeah.
You're fired.
But you're fired. All right. With that being said, we hope you enjoyed this video of the American Revolution, Part 2 by Oversimplified. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Hit that ring bell for notifications when we go live or upload content. And if there's a video you would like us to react to, well, just type it
Let us know.
in the comment section below.
We can read.
Bye-bye.
Bye.